Here's how to make money in property if you just want to buy and hold and ride the capital growth wave. Property doesn't double every 10 years. It goes through cycles. Those cycles last for 2 to 3 years. So if you've got a graph with a timeline on it, property over time will grow like that. But it's not actually linear. You go through phases where you go through a boom and then you go through a period of stagnation. And you go through a boom and then a period of stagnation. Now, if you can understand and grasp this concept that property does not double every 10 years, it goes through 2 to 3 year boom cycles and 2 to 7 year bust cycles or stagnation periods. So this boom cycle is the 2 to 3 years. So most typical boom cycles are 2 to 3 years. And then you go through a typical stagnation or bust cycle. Now, in most major capital cities, the stagnation period will just level off. In terms of real property values, because you've got inflation, the real property value actually declines as a result of inflation, but your property might stay the same price, for example. In a lot of regional areas, we've seen huge property devaluations, like up to 50%. And even more in some areas. I worked in a property in a place called Moranbah. Property values went from 750,000 down to 200,000, literally within probably a 6-month window. So it's a very regional area. And then you get ready and go through the boom cycle again, which goes for 2 to 3 years. And what normally drives the boom cycle is not what you think. So you've got two main factors when it comes to property values growing in price or going up. One is the supply and demand. So is there less supply and is there more demand? But then the second major factor, which most people don't actually understand, is the capacity to pay. And that capacity to pay drives what people can afford to pay for the property. And it also means that prices incline when people can afford to pay more for that property. And where does affordability come from? For most people, they borrow money. So it's from finance. So once the banks start lending money more freely, once your serviceability goes up, once money is easier from the banks, then that buying power goes up and that demand also increases. And same thing on the decline. When the bank starts pulling that funding back, which is what we saw when interest rates started going up in mid-2022, the banks started pulling a lot of funding. So it meant that people couldn't afford to spend as much on their properties. Certain areas went into decline that didn't have the demand. Other areas just kept powering. And normally those more affordable areas, speaking holistically around Australia, those more affordable areas during that period of time actually saw a price growth because people were priced out of other markets. So they had to look for cheaper markets once interest rates were inclining. So that is the typical property cycle where, yes, property can double in 10 years, but it goes through ups and downs in that period of time. And if you're holding during this 2 to 7 year stagnation period and you get in during that period of time, you will lose money in property. And that's when most people end up. They end up losing money because by the time you account for money, interest back to the bank, holding costs like land tax rates, then you get some rental income, you end up being negatively geared. That might be $10,000 a year, it might be $50,000 a year. And if you have to sustain that for 5 years, and it's, let's say it's $10,000 a year for 5 years, and that's what the property's costing you, that's $50,000 in negative income. Yes, you can claim the depreciation, but you're only claiming the depreciation because you're losing money. So you need to pull that cash flow from somewhere else to pay for that shortfall. And if you don't have the cash flow, then you're forced to sell the property and not realizing the gains when the market actually swings back the other way. So the opportune time to get into the market is not during the stagnation period, because that can go for 7 years. And in some areas that are regional, it's gone for 10 years or longer. Some markets have never recovered. The ideal time to get into the market is actually right at the start of the boom cycle, because you know that it's an upswing. You can see all the indicators and you get in right at the start, and you can normally ride that 2 to 3 year growth cycle. And the market that we're in at the moment, we're actually seeing growth cycles in that stagnation period be very short, where the market only takes a breather for 18 months, 2 years, it's done some modest growth, and then it goes again. Now that is a once in 20-year event, which is currently happening in many parts around Australia. But once it gets to the top of this next boom cycle, for a lot of different areas, we're now going to go through a typical stagnation period, which is probably going to be a lot longer than what we've just experienced with a 2-year flattening of the market in various locations around Australia. Remember this video over the next few years when we see this boom cycle play out and the stagnation cycle or the bust cycle also play out.